Welcome into the first ever Gym Sport Go podcast. For this opening one, I'm joined by my good mate from over the ditch from Fox Sport, Christy Doran. Christy, thanks for your time. Mate, Raylene Castle, the head of Australian Rugby, is suggesting $120 million in lost revenue. What on earth is going on over there?
Well, that's the price you pay when you don't have any rugby. You don't have any product to show. Unfortunately, all the revenue's dried up because, well, look, that 120 million is the worst case scenario. That is if they don't get any rugby played further in 2020. But it's quite likely that we're not going to see the vast majority of it. So whether or not it's 80 million, 100 million, we're not exactly sure, but we just know that on Tuesday, these are the hard facts, that on Tuesday, 75% of the Rugby Australia workforce was let go, either let go permanently or on a 3 months, no pay, unfortunately. So that was a huge, colossal blow for the organisation. But looking wider from that, we've also got the Super Rugby sides that have been massively affected. In particular, someone like the Melbourne Rebels, where the entire staff has been stood down until July the 1st at the earliest. So a real doomsday, one of the darkest days in Australian rugby for some time.
Similar sort of scenes over here for New Zealand rugby. We've seen a lot of the players over here say that they're willing to take a pay cut. What's the willingness like in Australian rugby for the players to take a pay cut?
Well, I heard something on Monday that suggested that, not that they necessarily would, but they were open to the idea that all players, from the Michael Hoopers of the world to the Jed Holloways to the ones that are just in their first season, like a Will Harrison, that everybody would potentially be on $50,000 for the entire 2020 and 2021 as a method of trying to get through this. I don't think that would necessarily happen. We heard on Monday afternoon, Raylene Castle talk about 30% for the executives to have a pay cut. She's taking a 50% pay cut herself. Wow. On the back of that, Justin Harrison, the former Wallaby and now Rupa CEO, jumped on that and thought that if a 30% pay bracket, that doesn't look so bad, and I'm sure the players would be willing to cop that. But there is no way in hell that, unfortunately, the players are only going to be able to take that amount, because it's going to be at least double, you would think. We had Tim Horan talk yesterday that it could be 75, 80%. It's going to be a huge amount regardless.
Well, mate, we both know in the media circles, you've got to tighten the belt. If they're not playing, how on earth can they be expected to get paid? Everyone across all sectors of society is hurting because of this, and rugby players are going to have to hurt too.
Exactly. And it wouldn't surprise me that if in the coming weeks, the coming months, if no rugby is played, then unfortunately the current Rugby Australia, as how we've come to know it, could potentially go under. And if that is the case, then do players get paid at all? They likely don't. So I think that they're going to, for the short term at least, have to just suck up whatever happens, as bad as that sounds and as cold-hearted as that sounds.
Yeah, there's talk here in New Zealand of a semi-professional competition. Do you think that could be the case in Australia, that you resort to or revert back to a semi-professional competition?
I think every scenario is on the table. If Rugby Australia was to go under, they would have to start again completely, and all the things like Super Rugby completely are blown up. In the 2021, the broadcast arrangements that have already been set in stone for everyone but Rugby Australia, who haven't yet signed a broadcast deal beyond 2020, everything would be on the table. Whether or not that is going back to the semi-professionalism days, we will see, but you can't rule it out, can you?
No. Do you think, mate, this could save Raylene Castle's job? Because there was talk of her being sacked. She didn't bring in this coronavirus. She can't be blamed for what's going on now, maybe.
It's funny, you look back at political events and prime ministers and presidents, and sometimes things of adversity help them and help garner support, because you come together as a nation to pull out of this. I don't think this necessarily could help Raylene Castle, because if you think about it, COVID-19, the pandemic, she can't be blamed for that. But getting Rugby Australia in the strongest position possible, she could perhaps have done more to help the game going forward. You look at the number one is the broadcast dollars. at the moment, Rugby Australia was to delay this for months and months. They've been already delaying it for months because Miss Castle decided not to take a deal during the World Cup last year when Fox Sports presented a pretty strong offer, the same offer that they had done previously. And so when you haven't sewn up the finances, the strength of the business of rugby going forward, there is a bit to blame there. And you might say, well, there was also the whole Israel Folau saga going on at that time. But even Israel Folau and the contract can be sewn back towards Raylene Castle. So if that contract had been stronger and foolproof, then Rugby Australia wouldn't have had to deal with what they'd done and dealt with last year. So I don't think it necessarily will help her. If anything, it might paint her in a worse of light.
There's a lot of talk here, and some people are quite excited by this, that we're going to end up, with a ring-fenced sort of New Zealand domestic competition, our Mitre 10 Cup as it is at the moment. And there's a belief that will be very, very popular. And I guess if there's no other rugby, it will be popular. What about in Australia? If you're only playing domestically, how popular do you think that's going to be?
Well, let me ask you this question. We've got the Rugby League, National Rugby League, which is played by everyone but the New Zealand Warriors. You've got an AFL competition that is played exclusively in Australia. Look, Australians get around sport. I think that if you're able to market this and perhaps build it up, have more than 4 sides, bring back the Western Force, which could be financed by Andrew Forrest. Well, you never know. It's not been played like this for a long, long time. We know that Australian audiences don't get up in the middle of the night, and I don't think New Zealand audiences do, to watch South Africa play. No one really knows that Argentina are playing on a Sunday morning half the time. Yeah. I think if anything, it could be a bit of a blessing in disguise. Ultimately, could we see a trans-Tasman competition with the Japanese side or two, or someone from the Pacific Islands? I think it's always been inevitable that would be moving towards this direction, and perhaps the coronavirus pandemic might just push this forward by 5 years, because I think we're all under the understanding and belief that beyond the next broadcast deal, it's quite likely South Africa wouldn't have been here there in the first place.
Yeah, and look, the good news is that we get to keep the Bledisloe Cup for another year, mate. So that's all good, because I think Dave Rennie might have had those Wallabies in a very dangerous position. So quite happy about that as well. Just to wrap it up, mate, I know that you're a big James Bond fan, a huge James Bond fan. I'm a Jason Bourne fan myself. If you're looking at someone to fix this coronavirus, then, would you pick Ethan Hunt out of Mission Impossible, James Bond, or Jason Bourne?
Great question. What we've known is for a little while that Ethan Hunt just pops up randomly here and there every couple of years, but he's good for a short-term fix. Jason Bourne has come and gone. He's probably in retirement. James Bond continues to push forward and has been for 50, 60 years. So I think on that basis alone, for continuity perspectives, you probably want James Bond 007.
Fair enough. I bow to your superior knowledge. Hey, Christy, thanks so much for your time, mate. Always appreciate it.
Pleasure. Cheers.
There you go. That is Christy Doran out of Fox Sport. Thank you so much for your time on the Gym Sport Go podcast. Catch you again very, very soon.